It's all Disneyland's fault. Walt Disney's original Magic Kingdom is just so stuffed with different worlds of fantasy. And growing up here in Anaheim, California, just across the street, it was impossible not to grow up being inspired by our main attraction here. Fantasyland certainly inspired my fascination with old medieval castles and my love of old fairy tales and folklore. And to this very day, whenever I think about space or think about the future, images of the Tomorrowland of my childhood with futuristic people movers come to mind, along with colorful sky buckets, underwater submersible exploration, monorails whizzing around, moving people around high above the crowded city streets. And no matter how many actual documentaries I watch, when I think of interstellar travel out in outer space, I see the whirring stars and I hear the infinite screams of Space Mountain. Critter Country definitely inspired my interest in the origin of folk tales. New Orleans Square definitely inspired my interest in things that are spooky of all sorts, and of course my interest in pirates. Pretty much hands down, Pirates of the Caribbean did that all by itself. And of course, over the last 25 years or so, I have ranged far and wide over the Old West, all over the Western United States, and was never bored for a moment learning about Western history and loving those wide open spaces. Some of that was almost certainly inspired by my deep love of Frontierland. And of course, since childhood, I've become a lifelong Mark Twain fan. I visited his birthplace, his grave, his many houses, and his boyhood hometown. But it was here on the rivers of America that I first encountered the name of Tom Sawyer traveling over to that beautiful island over there. And of course, these are the very waters wherein I saw my first ever Mississippi River steamboat and heard the name Mark Twain. And of course, this is all what Disneyland was meant to do. We could go off into a whole long side conversation about how this is exactly what Walt Disney wanted. He wanted people to be inspired. For the older folks, it was, look, a cute miniature thing of something we're already familiar with, and for the young kids, it was all about unlocking the imagination, expanding their horizons, the possibilities, inspiring them with historic tales. It certainly worked on me. But if we're talking about Disneyland inspiring me, then certainly no other land captured my imagination quite like Adventureland. It's always been my favorite land, and the first land we would start our Disneyland adventures in when I was a kid. Originally called True Life Adventureland, based on a series of Walt Disney documentaries about animals and far-off places around the world. Nothing takes the wilds of Africa and South America and the South Sea Islands and mixes them together quite like Adventureland. It's the ultimate exotic fantasy. There's just something about the fact that it's based on multiple exotic places around the world, and yet it is none of them. It's a fantasy destination all of its own. As a kid, I was always particularly impressed with the Jungle Cruise. The idea of taking a little boat out into the wild rivers of the world, underneath the tall trees and bamboo and jungle plants, with nothing but a little boat between you and the wild animals of the world. It filled me with a love of jungly, tropical-looking plants that has never left me. And although there's been a lot of changes to Adventureland just in my time here on this planet, the fact that there are still little bits of Africa and South America and India maybe and Switzerland still fills me with wonder and inspires my imagination to this very day. And very, very specifically, and to get to the point finally of coming down here, Adventureland is the place where I first encountered that magical tropical fantasy world of Tikis. Roaming around Adventureland today, there are far less tall, giant Tikis than there used to be. If you know where to look across the Jungle Cruise exit, there are still some old school ones hiding in the bushes, but for the most part, most of the old school big Tiki totems like the Adventureland greener Tiki that used to be just over here in front of the bazaar have disappeared now. But luckily, there's one Tiki palace, one Tiki portion of Adventureland that's been going strong since 1963 and has never gone away. A magical world of bamboo and singing birds that I would hazard a guess has been millions of people's first introduction to Tiki stuff. Walt Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room. It's almost like there are two fantasy gateways right here at the entrance to Adventureland. One is the gateway to a fantasy paradise in the jungle. The other a gateway into the tropical islands of Tiki. And if you stand between them, even though it gets busy and people will be bumping into you, you are standing between the works of two of the most influential artists in my life. One of them was one of Walt Disney's favorite Imagineers and artists, LeRoy Crump, who designed so much of the look of the Enchanted Tiki Garden out here in front of Walt Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room, including hand sculpting most and certainly the most impressive and memorable of the tiki totems out here. All of these tiki quote-unquote carvings. I say quote-unquote because these were all sculpted up out of clay from Rolly Crump's drawings by Rolly Crump himself to look like they were carved out of wood, and then later they made fiberglass molds, and that produces these concrete, resin, fiberglass, whatever they are, tikis that we see here today. As a matter of fact, according to Rolly, the way that he made these look like they were carved out of wood, the way he textured them, was to take a plastic fork from the canteen and run it down through the clay. Bet you didn't know there was plastic fork artistry out here at Disneyland, did ya? Now, the Tiki Room is an absolute classic, and it's not just the Enchanted Tiki Garden that's full of tikis. Inside, of course, you've got tiki masks. There are the tiki drummers perched way up high that beat on those drums during the storm. And of course, the massive singing tiki totems pretty much in every corner in here, which absolutely terrified me as a child when they would start singing. Now, of course, birds come to life and start singing as well in there. And the Enchanted Tiki Garden, or the Tiki Room Lanai out here, absolutely enchanted me and fascinated me as a child. But to keep the birds out of it and stick to our tiki theme for just a moment if we could, outside of the Tiki Room is an equally influential artist to me. Well, actually much more influential to me personally, but we'll get to that in a second. Someone who deserves to be much more famous than he is. Because as you know, once you pass under the gate and enter the world of Adventureland, on either side of you, you are surrounded by fantastic, strange, and mysterious masks. And shields. Most of which, or the most iconic of which, were hand carved out of wood by maybe the most prolific and influential tiki carver or tiki artist of all time. A man I had the very good fortune of knowing well, LeRoy Schmaltz of Oceanic Arts. Now, the crazy thing is that both LeRoy and Rolly have just left us, have just passed away within the last year, but their work is still out here, inspiring millions of people like me who perhaps have wandered by wondering, what are these? Where did they come from? Who designed them? How do you carve this out of wood? Now, LeRoy was such a prolific artist and such a master craftsman that he could work in so many styles. For example, he sculpted that Viking out there at Epcot in Florida, as well as one of the big Native American totem poles in Epcot in Canada. And he was certainly so good that Disney could hand him a drawing or a design, and LeRoy would do the carving, but maybe not the designing, which happens so often. Sometimes it's difficult to tell which ones of these were LeRoy's. Some of them like this are just so obvious because you know LeRoy's style. Others you recognize because you were able to pick them up off the shelf at his business, Oceanic Arts, which for 66 years provided tropical decor like this, and perhaps even more iconic, this right here, this tiki shield that would eventually become the inspiration for that shruggy Maui logo for the Polynesian Resort at Walt Disney World, where, by the way, hundreds of LeRoy's carvings are still out there on display, including all the signage for the resort. And Oceanic Arts provided all the lamps in the resort, too. It's a little bit emotional standing out here thinking about old LeRoy and his work, and how there might be more generations of kids like me absorbing this artwork, checking out these masks, and wondering just how on earth are they made. And to circle all the way back, this is why I say it's all Disneyland's fault that my shoes are full of little wooden splinters, and my hands are covered with all kinds of blisters, because throughout my life I was so inspired by the art and the vibes of Adventureland that I not only always dreamed of having a little jungle tiki garden of my own, but I also always wanted to learn how this stuff was made. And so in all my spare time for the past year, all I've been doing whenever I can sneak outside to the garage is carving wood. And that's because for 20 years or so I would go into LeRoy's workshop at Oceanic Arts and ask him, how do you do all this stuff? And watch him routing and chiseling and painting. And last year he gave me the secret to carving tikis, which is take the wood, and cut away everything that's not the tiki. I said, hey, that's a Michelangelo quote, isn't it? I like your version better, though. And he goes, Michelangelo, he was a student of mine, don't you know? Now, this is something I've never talked about, but on my last visit with LeRoy, just shortly before he passed away, when I went on my second leg of the road trip I was on last year, I was showing him some little masks that I had carved, and he said, when are you gonna carve some tikis? And I'm going, you know, I don't know, they're awfully big, I don't know if I have time. And he goes, you've been coming in here, watching me, bugging me, asking me questions for 15 or 20 years. You wanna carve some tikis, you've just got to do it. He knew I was leaving for that road trip, and he told me, I might not be here when you get back, but I'll still be watching your adventures. Ooh, it gets you right in the feels every time. Now, if you'd like to learn more about LeRoy and Oceanic Arts, there's a great book out called The Godfathers of Tiki, written by a friend of mine, Jordan Reichek, that is absolutely fantastic. And if you want to learn about Rolly Crump, including not just the Tiki stuff out here, but all the work he did for Disney, he co-authored an autobiography with my friend Jeff Heimbach called It's Kind of a Cute Story, which you could pick up on Amazon right now, I believe. Anyway, these props, these pieces of decoration at Disneyland have meant so much more than just decor to me. They've always got my imagination going, and now they've got my hands going, carving away on signs and masks and tikis of my own, making a right mess out of my backyard, which I'll show you guys in just a little bit. But first, I've got one errand to run that I absolutely must do. So we're gonna take our leave of Walt Disney's original Magic Kingdom and head down the road just a few minutes away to the Orange Circle, where Randomland has burst the bonds of YouTube and the tiny screen and become real life at the Antique Station, where we have ourselves a little Randomland antique booth. Now, I don't want to show you too much of what's in the booth at the moment, even though we've got some great stuff: vintage Peanuts, vintage Disney signed and inscribed books by Walter Knott. The Orange Circle shirts are back for one last printing. What you see is what you get. There's an old dinner bell in here, some sick giant Magic Kingdom maps, vintage placemats and action figures. So it's not that there isn't great stuff in here, I just don't want to show you all of it because we're still in the process of big changes out here. This whole thing is being remodeled. You can see we've got new shelves here for the Randomland posters and awesome paper stuff, some prints. Look at this, prints of some of my old vintage pictures. You can get old Knott's Berry Farm menus, all kinds of old paper paraphernalia in here. Look at that. Remember these? Remember these? But the changes aren't finished yet. There's going to be a whole new display case. This one will be gone. And so, of course, when it's all done, I'm going to come down here and give you the full tour. It's going to be done very soon. They've been working on it. This has become a whole family business. My mom's involved now, my brother, my dad. For about 6 and 9 months or so, I really wasn't that involved. Nobody was involved. It was just sitting here getting emptier and emptier. Some of you may even have come here during the lean times and seen a lot of things sold out. Just seen it in ruins and chaos. Well, that's all about to end. But like I said, I'm gonna have to film a whole thing about that when they're done remodeling. There's a lot of rad stuff in here, but it's only like a third of the stuff. This isn't even a third of the stuff that just piled up in my living room, much less the stuff that's in my mom's house. We have tons of new stuff to go in there. Vintage Star Wars, all sorts. But the one thing I'm down here for now is just to see if the lights in this display case are flickering on camera. And they are not. My dad and my brother are building a whole brand new display case, and I was like, well, what if the lights that you put in the new display case flicker? You know, a lot of those new LED lights will flicker on cameras uncontrollably. And yes, sometimes you can change your camera settings and nullify the effects, but sometimes you can't. So they were asking me, like, well, how are the current lights on camera? I'm like, I don't remember. So I had to come down here and check it out. Look at this. This is created out of, I can't help myself, I have to show you at least this. This is a poster for a lost attraction. There never was a poster for it, but I managed to get hold of these extremely rare vintage photos and create a poster for Hobbiton, USA on the Redwood Highway. Come get some sick art, friends. Speaking of art, nobody ever picked up these recreations that I made of my 2 favorite signs on Route 66. I think a lot of people don't know they're for sale. And wasn't this bear created by the creator of Cabbage Patch Kids? I think it's signed even. Furskins is a deep cut. Vintage Boy Scout backpacking backpack. I had that on my wall when we did the forest living room. Look at this. Got some custom wooden deer. A lot of good stuff in here and a lot more good stuff to come. If you've ever wondered, like, how do people get into vintage stuff? Like, how do they know so much about old history? If you want to get into that stuff, I got a hot tip for you. Look at this. Little magazines from the 60s and all these old school pamphlets photographs, postcards. You can do a lot of research with these materials. Look at this. This is $2. Got comics and magazines, VHS tapes, and toys. There's something for everyone down here, friends, so come on down. All right, I'll stop now because, like I said, I'm coming back soon with a much bigger update. As a matter of fact, this might be the last time we see the booth look like this in something even remotely like its classic layout that it's had for the past, what, 2 years or so? It's all about to change. That reminds me, I gotta bring in a bunch of signed Random Land posters. Oh, here's one. Signed Random Land posters. All right, the lights do not flicker. Pity the fool that has lights that flicker. So it's time for us to get out of here. We've done our duty. And I'll show you now why this entire time I've been talking to you, my feet have been in pain and even bleeding through my socks a little bit because my shoes and socks are full of shrapnel. But to do that, we're gonna have to take our leave of the orange circle right now and head back over to Anaheim. I love the orange circle. It's like Main Street, USA without the crowds. Well, unless you come at lunch, and then this place is a madhouse. Ooh, look at this. Like I told you, quite the mess. There's chalk and chisels and stain everywhere. I was lucky enough to have a fella donate me a couple of palm tree logs, some of which are sort of useless, but others have already turned into some fine tikis out here. Turns out carving a palm with chisels is ridiculously difficult. It dulls your chisels real quick, and it's hard to work with because it's essentially just grass. The plants in the backyard got kind of out of control, so I've been cutting them back and trying to dig out the tikis I already owned. But now that my separate little jungle is growing up out of the tiki planter that I've carved, I thought I'm gonna have to move my old tikis here and create some new ones. And with Oceanic Arts closed, the best way is to just do it myself. Turns out carving a 3D tiki out of a log is pretty hard, especially with chisels. So my friend Spike from Spike's Breezeway Cocktail Hour loaned me his tiny little chainsaw so I could try using that. And it's going okay, but the first lesson I've learned is why carvers wear chaps and jeans. Because now I've been walking around all day long with shrapnel and splinters in my socks. Now I've gotten fairly good, fairly competent at carving like 2D things like masks or these 2D sort of tikis here, 2D, 3D sort of flat guys, similar to what you'd see on the gates to Adventureland. Confident enough that pretty soon I'll be offering some like this for sale, but pun very much intended, I thought I should be branching out. And on the way home from South Dakota, I stopped by my friend Luke's shop again by Whittlesticks, and he loaded me up with a bunch of these log pieces, stuff like this. You can see it's sort of part of a tree. And in addition to carving some of those palm logs with chisels, I started chiseling away on one of these logs to make a big tiki man. He's unfinished, so he looks sort of funky. Plus, he's a little lopsided. I should have planned things out a little bit better. I thought I was just doing it for practice, and it ended up turning out pretty good. He's a little uneven, he's a little funky, but that's okay. Bear in mind, you're also seeing him very, very unfinished. I plan on finishing this guy tonight with a little more stain. There's a little sanding to do, obviously. But that was all mallet and chisels, this guy, and it took so long to do this and to do those little palm logs that even though chainsaws, even little ones, are one of my biggest fears, I thought I'd have a go. Now, I have no instruction manual. All I have is LeRoy's advice of cut away everything that's not the tiki, so I'll have to give you a progress report on this later on. It's getting dark, and I don't know how much chainsawing my neighbors are going to put up with before I start chiseling on this guy. But I'll probably get a few more cuts in tonight, even though there's no way we're going to finish him. But one thing I can finish, like I say, is this 3 or 4 foot tiki man right here. Too bad. I know there's guys out there cringing, woodworkers and craftsmen who are going like, oh no, they spend their whole lifetime learning how to apply a perfectly even coat of stain. Obviously this isn't even, but I kind of like the look, the patchy look, the natural sort of jungly look of this. As with anything I do though, I would tell you, please don't do any of it at home, at least not the way I do it. I have no idea what I'm doing, and that's the way I like it. As for the chainsaw stuff, I can already tell you that I totally misjudged the dimensions, what was gonna look good. And this is a terrible, terrible log to practice on. So far, I'm preferring my chisels to this chainsaw. But I'm sure just like any other tool, once I learn to use it properly and know, oh, this cut shouldn't be a chainsaw, this should be a chisel, etc., it'll be fine. As for this giant thing right here, just ignore that for now. That's for Midsummer Scream. Pay no attention to the giant thing in my driveway. Anyway, that's what's been going on here in the LeRoy E. Schmaltz Memorial Workshop, which is full of stuff for the antique booth right now, and my friend's tools that are building this thing for Midsummer Scream. There's a discount code for that, by the way, in the Facebook group. It's been one heck of a summer so far, and it's nowhere near over. Look at that. That thing looks pretty good now. Anyway, so far, the summer's worth of traveling was pretty expensive. Gas prices are out of control, aren't they? The world feels like a mess sometimes, but we're still having adventures. We're still finding ways to stay on the quest for positivity. But if you're in the area and feel like heading on down to the antique station to show us some love, or joining the exclusive Adventurers Club over on our Patreon, or just checking out the links for some sick merch down below for our 10th anniversary, I'd really appreciate it. The sooner we fill up those coffers again, the sooner we hit the road again. So definitely check out the t-shirts and all that other stuff, and the exclusive pin for Adventurers Club members, because as much fun as this is taking inspiration from LeRoy and Rolly and all the tiki greats, I don't think I'm gonna be a professional tiki carver anytime soon. I'm definitely not a fine artist. I'll take folk artist. A folk artist works, I guess. Anyway, friends, that's what's going on in my world. I hope everything is going great in yours, but for now, we've done our duty. You can go home and sleep well. See you next time. Stop the clock! Well, I thought I was done with that episode. I thought I was done telling you about stuff, but I wasn't. Just continue to ignore this thing. It's for Midsummer Scream. If you're coming to Midsummer Scream, you'll see it then. Ignore my friend Chris back here. Ignore fake Tyler. He said he doesn't like you. Since I just told you all of those things, an accidentally large amount of time has elapsed. Firstly, we've realized we need to get things ready for Midsummer Scream. That's at the end of July, and we are reappearing with a thing. You'll see it. And this guy. Secondly, LeRoy Schmaltz's old business, Oceanic Arts, which has been closed for a while now, has now reopened the doors to have a big clear out warehouse sale of stools, chairs, shelves, old chunks of wood, stuff that if you're creative, you could put to really good use. So I've gone down there and lent as much of a hand as I can, more moral support than anything since I'm sort of a useless guy. My son and I had to clean out the whole garage. We're still in that process, as you can tell. Don't look! I'm down at the antique store. Within just hours of the last time I showed you anything, they built all new display cases, so the booth is already transformed. It has tons more stuff than you just saw. And out here in the Random Land jungle, that tiki that you guys saw me carving with the chainsaw, well, the log wasn't too good. It was way too grassy, coming apart, so I sort of roughly finished him. And he's just sort of a hangout in the bushes, let plants grow over him, look like an old fallen idol type of deal back here. I also haven't shaved. Look at this. I haven't had any time. Landlocked with a little glitch in the van that I haven't exactly had the cash to fix just yet, so I'm gonna go in this week. So I'm a little bit behind on getting back out on the road with my kiddo. I finally caught up on the editing. More adventures are coming, and I'm gonna show you guys next time when we come back, not only what we're working on for Midsummer Scream, a little sneak peek, as it should be a little farther along in the process by then, but also when I gave up on that little tiki over there because it was falling apart, I started on a new one. And I'll give you guys an update on that next time as well. Don't look too much. Spoilers! Okay, now you've done your duty. You can go home and sleep well. Oh my gosh, look at Mary Poppins. She is practically perfect in every way.
Oh, it's probably been about 3 years ago, something like that. I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago.
Because that's just one of a kind, right?
Yeah, right, yeah. I had a extra large piece of wood left over from some other thing. I decided I'd make it up. I made different ones similar to that, but like I had bonded a thing like this on a big circle and so forth, but this was a big chunk of wood. So
I love that thing right there.
It's a New Guinea emblem figure too.
And you guys went to the Abalone, what is it, Abalone?
Abalone,
yeah. Yeah, you went out there, right?
The Mop Prick is the other name they use, the Mop Prick district and the Abalone tribe. Great,
so now LeRoy just told me that this was in an art show and was one of his favorite pieces. Now I have to buy it. I can't justify that purchase at all, but imagine if one of your favorite artists of all time created a one-of-a-kind thing that he really liked. That was all hand-carved and created by him, and he might not be doing this art for much longer. And you have your chance, one chance, to get your hands on a piece like that. What would you do?
Do it, or you'll regret. Buy a tiki, 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 buy a tiki.
All right, I'll do it. Everybody just stop yelling at me. Whew. Oh yeah, I forgot. I also made a woodable. If any of you guys have big old logs, like you're cutting a big tree in your backyard, or you know somebody that cuts down trees for a living and has a bunch of logs they could give me, especially redwood or anything like that, let me know. Email Fake Tyler.